Hey, Sunday school leader. Hope you're having a great week. I know I am because I'm here with my two favorite little guys, Mr. Henry over here and Mr. Charlie over here. And we've been in Clemson, South Carolina here for a few days and didn't really enjoy the game last week, but that's okay. Life goes on. Well, I've asked Mr. Henry if he would to introduce our lesson this week. So Henry, what are we studying this week?
We are continuing in the unit on Philippians. This is the fifth lesson called Joy Through Peace. From chapter 4, verses 1 through 9. The main thought is believers find joyous peace through Christ, even in the midst of turmoil.
That was very good. Very good. Thank you for doing that. All right, let's dive in and see what Philippians has to say to us this week. Well, thanks, Henry and Charlie. I really appreciate your helping Papa with the video introduction this week. Well, as we move into Philippians chapter 4, we see Paul start to give some practical advice to the church. And did you notice the very first word in the chapter? Therefore. And when you see it, that means that there's something before it whose consequences are defined after it. And you can substitute the terms consequently, for that reason, and even because of all this for the word therefore. So what came before it? Well, it was the last part of chapter 3. I'm going to summarize that for you here. So Paul told his readers to follow his example, not to pay any attention to the false teachers whose minds were on earthly things. Instead, they were to keep their minds on heavenly things, for that's where their real citizenship was in heaven. And Jesus, who has all power, will transform their bodies into glorified bodies. Then we get to chapter 4. Because of all these things, therefore, stand firm in the Lord in this way. In what way? Well, in the way he just mentioned, by keeping their mind on heavenly things. But in verse 2, we see that not everything was all rosy for the Philippian church when he pleaded with two ladies in the church to have the same mind. Now, obviously, there was some kind of disagreement between these two ladies that Paul had heard about. See, unity is vital for a healthy church. Now, remember, though, that's not the same as uniformity. You know, a local congregation can be composed of people from various backgrounds, different races, hopefully different spiritual gifts. But just like the United States motto, pluribus unum, or out of many, one. A church of diversity can have unity. Okay? Individuals with different makeups can still have a single purpose. Now, have you ever known of a disagreement at church to get out of hand? Now, unfortunately, too many church splits and anger in business meetings are over things that really don't matter for the sake of eternity. And that's what can happen when a disagreement escalates into making your side a hill that you're willing to die on. Now, obviously, the disagreement between these two ladies was bad enough that Paul had to mention it. And he had to request some of the church folks there in Philippi to intervene before it got any worse. Now, as we look at verse 4, we see that repeating command. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say, rejoice. So what does that mean to rejoice? It means to find the joy, to be thankful, to count your blessings. And we know that our joy is not dependent on our circumstances. I think we've said this already earlier in the unit. Our circumstances go up and down, right? We have good days, we have bad days, and that's where our happiness is found. Happiness is like a roller coaster, but joy is like that bedrock that's underneath our emotions. And that's why we can experience joy in a funeral while we're sad. Okay? We can be sad there, but if our loved one who's departed was a believer, we can have that joy that we will see them again. And one way we can show our joy to other people is through gentleness. When we're joyful, we aren't on edge as much, which leads to being a kinder and gentler person. And not just to our friends, not just to the people who look like us, not just to the people who went to our alma mater, who are in our fraternity or social club, not just to the people in our political party, but we're to show gentleness to all, it says. And then there's the statement that the Lord is near. What does that mean? Well, not only is he near to us spiritually, as he abides in us and we abide in him, of course he's near to us, but it's also an indication that his second coming is near, and every day is nearer than it was before. Now, of course, we don't know when that's going to be, do we? So we live with that joy and gentleness to all as if Christ were coming today. I have a note that hangs on my wall behind my computer in my office that says this: work as if vacation is tomorrow. And you know how it is. The day before vacation, there's so much that needs to be done. Before you leave, you're focused, you're laser focused, and you got to get so much more done than you would in a normal day. Now, if we knew that Christ was coming today or tomorrow or next week, we'd be a lot busier and have a lot more joy in our heart, and we would be a lot nicer to people and try to win them to Christ. And that's what I think the point is here, the meaning of what he's trying to say here. Now we get on down to verses 6 and 7, and it talks about not being anxious about anything at all. And when Jesus spoke in what we call the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6, verses 25 through 34, he also told us not to worry about anything. So what are we to do instead of being anxious? In every situation, we're to present our request to God with prayer, petition, and thanksgiving. Now, some in your class, they may be intimidated by prayer. Okay, but let's just remind them that prayer is nothing more than just meaningful conversation with God. And of course, communication is a two-way street, isn't it? Petition, now that includes those specific needs that we lay at the feet of the Father and ask Him to help us with in those areas. Thanksgiving, of course, that gets back to the joy that we have. When we're joyful, we have a thankful heart. We can always find things to be thankful for, even in the worst of circumstances. And we don't come to God to inform Him, do we? We don't come and tell Him about stuff that's going on. He knows about it. Nothing surprises Him. So why do we pray if we're not informing Him about the situation? Well, a lot of answers to that question, but one thing, prayer reminds us of who is ultimately in control. We can be anxious and fret about so many things, but when we realize that God is in control, and as Romans 8:28 says, He works all things together for good who love Him and are called according to His purpose. When we realize that, then this brings a peace into our lives, and that peace is greater than any human mind can comprehend. And of course, we know peace isn't just the absence of conflict, but it's the assurance of overcoming the conflict. So that's the peace. That peace guards our hearts and guards our mind. And when we earnestly pray, we turn things over to God, and He gives us that peace that He's in control, and that peace guards our hearts and minds. And that's what helps us not to be anxious. The peace guards those negative thoughts and that anxiousness from entering our minds. So it's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving. As we pray, we gain trust in God. He protects our minds. We're anxious less. We pray more. And so the cycle goes on. So instead of stinking thinking, as Zig Ziglar called it, we're to think on good things that are true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, or praiseworthy. These are the things to think on. Of course, the ultimate culmination of all those terms would be Jesus. To think on Jesus, to center our life on Jesus. So let's encourage our class to do that. Well, here are a couple of takeaways for you for this week. Communication is key in any relationship, isn't it? It's true in the marriage relationship, and it's true with our relationship with God. Be in communication with God. And that means not just talking, but listening. Okay. Another takeaway is to think on the positive. To think on the positive takes discipline. You know, have you ever tried to diet but ended up eating more? Guilty. That's because you think about what you're not supposed to do. You're thinking on the negative. And here's the thought process of how that usually goes. You get this hunger pain, right? You're trying to diet, you get a hunger pain, and you think, I'm dieting, so I'm not supposed to think about those foods that are off limits. Things like a chocolate chip cookie. Well, that really sounds good. Chocolate chips. I love chocolate chips. Chocolate chip cookies are the best. Well, that sounds good. Now, just one cookie probably wouldn't hurt, would it? And now, before you know it, the whole package of cookies is gone. So, as 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5 states, when those negative thoughts come to our mind, let's take them captive, make them obedient to Christ. Let's think on the positive. Let's not be anxious. God is in control. The next week, we're going to continue here in chapter 4 and looking through at verses 10 through 20, looking at joy and contentment. So I hope you have a great rest of the week. I'm enjoying my last couple of days here in Clemson, South Carolina. I'll be back to Arkansas here by Sunday. So don't forget to pray for and with your class this week. I appreciate your watching.